All right. Think we're live. What is going on, guys? Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are doing a midday podcast
Yeah.
with the OG in the Palantir community, unofficial Palantir PR. Uh, dude, from the beginning, I remember like watching your stuff way back when I think I told you this, when we first chatted, where when I first looked into Palantir, I'm like, man, like I wonder if there's somebody covering the stuff on YouTube, and it was like Palantir Vision. I'm like, this is my guy. But yeah,
Uh,
OG in the community, man. Welcome, Jackson. I mean, I think we've been talking about doing this for a while, but I've been sort of like really busy and stuff like that. So I really appreciate you coming on, talk of our favorite stock, Palantir, and we're gonna cover some other stuff as well throughout the chat. But just wanted to welcome you to the show, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Shibari. This is my second time as a guest on a podcast, and you're in good company with Dave Lee as the other interviewer. So happy to reconnect with you, and excited for the conversation.
I don't even know what was that about, man. I think you did a pretty good job. I think it's so funny because a lot of those questions are so easily covered, and and they're so easily misconstrued as well. So
Well,
it is what it is.
yeah, that's funny because I was focusing on the company right after the DPO, like I made a pre-DPO
Yeah.
video, and then I was like, oh, that did well. Like I'm interested in the company myself. We're going to talk about it's nothing crazy, but how I got interested in Palantir. But after that, it was like all the initial FUD was like, oh, the insider selling, the SBC, the like, oh, it's a consultancy. And so like I had enough of that in like the first month of covering the company that I just like blocked that from my brain. Whenever I saw it, was like someone's like, "Oh, it's a consultancy." I was like, "No, it's not." Like we know it's not. And then Dave's like, and credit to him, like this is something that should be like easy to answer, right? But when he
Yeah.
asked me that, I was like, I like completely skipped like the intro of like why it's not a consultancy and like
Man,
got right
I
into
think you got it, man. The,
something.
the the point of what you were talking about was made. I think with Dave Lee's like audience, they're fairly professional and stuff, and they have a certain different kind of view than some of us in the Palantir community. Where I think I don't know, I don't have the numbers, but I feel like the demographics are a little bit younger on this side. So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll kick it off. We'll just start talking. But to be honest, I wanted to get your take on this just because you look fairly young, so you're a young guy, and I wanted to know because see, my brothers my middle brothers are on 20, and the other guy's like, forget him, he's too young. But I want to know how you got into investing, just because it's really important. I think it's really important that young people, and I'm not that old either. I'm like, what shit? I forgot how old I am. I think I'm 32, but I can't count backwards. But so the point is, like, some of us really need to, because I think for me especially, right, I've started to see, and from my parents' side as well, I've started to see like how literally putting money into your mattress isn't exactly gonna help you save, or isn't exactly gonna help you grow your wealth and become successful, or whatever the case is in the long run. So how'd you get into this stuff?
Well, I'll tell you, when the stocks are down 50%, you're going to wish you did that.
So
Right? You can buy 2 times as many stocks. But yeah, so interested in investing pretty early on in like middle school. My like in eighth grade or whatever, there was like
yeah,
a stock competition. Now I was familiar with stocks even before that, but I think you're right about like education needing to introduce finance better. Like, I don't think it necessarily has to, like, I don't think there have to be finance, like, full on classes.
right,
But I
right.
think the introduction, like, giving that spark of interest to, it's not going to be everyone, but it's going to be some people that say, like, hey, it actually is kind of cool to invest in my favorite business. And what got me into investing is really like, you can make money by being right about something and by being right about, no, and it doesn't like the whole thing is like we like make this so complicated, but we're not doing any of the work. Zero. We're making the investment, and the company goes out and does the work to make the money, to get the returns. So
Yeah,
for me, it was like a matter of like emotional attachment to a company. So like early on I invested in like one share. Like, all right, this is not
yeah.
this like Fitbit, GoPro, Apple. Like I was like, these are companies I had the products of, and not the companies I believed in. So that doesn't mean everything, right? Because Fitbit ended up being bought by Google after the stock was stagnated. GoPro didn't do so well, but it's come back. I don't hold them anymore. And then Apple obviously has done well. But what my point is, like, I feel the first point of contact between someone that wants to get into investing and actually investing is probably the product. is the product
Okay.
side.
Okay.
So I feel like if you believe in a product, and this is what I saw with Tesla, I got to ride in a Tesla, a family member's Tesla. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, I want to invest. So I think that's how I got into investing. It wasn't anything crazy, but I think it's once you realize that you can leverage a company's like financials and their future growth by investing with them, I think that's the key right there, and everything comes after that.
Sorry, I was talking to me. Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that's kind of the same approach, but for me, that's actually it's funny because that's so smart. I haven't thought about that, and it's one of those things that I remember asking like even my parents. I'm like, man, like you guys miss so many different like amazing companies and stuff, and you use the products every day, and it's like such a funny thing to think of, right? Because you use some of these products on a daily basis. It's really important to take a sort of like step back and say, hey, like how can I really? And I feel like that's the problem. Like people don't understand that. And by the way, like when I speak, everyone on my side, like from a familial perspective or anyone I'm associated with, very illiterate when it comes to stock markets and that kind of stuff, right? So the first thing is they're always like, oh, what if I lose all my money? Like, yeah, I mean, if you invested in Apple, they're not going to go to zero, dude. I mean, what are the chances of that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, never
zero.
say never, but I mean, come on.
No,
Yeah,
no, but I think that's important though, right? It's you have to be, and it doesn't matter what your background is. You have to be interested enough, and this goes for anything. I think you're interested enough. So for me, the jumping off point was like, I love the product. I want to invest for the long run. Like I think
yeah,
Apple can do so much better into the future, and I think I can make money doing that. They can make money for me essentially. Anyway, once you have a connection to it, then you can do more of your own research, read books, listen to whatever, watch videos. It's really just you need one point of contact, and then you'll be interested enough to learn.
that's true. That's true. And on top of that, I think this is a stigma that I've sort of like quelled this from my family. But every time anyone thinks stock market, they think of day traders and like Wolf of Wall Street, that kind of stuff. So there's a stigma. But I hear what you're saying. So now coming on to our favorite stock of, I guess our channels. How
Yes.
did you get into Palantir, man? Palantir is such a deep tech company. It's to a point where it's like the one time that anybody, especially you, because I know you've been doing this for a while, and the time that you started, the only thing I remember this very clearly when I looked at any articles, and I'll tell you how I got into it in a second, but I looked at all the articles and it was all George Soros got out of Palantir and like the Palantir is gonna like steal your data and make like mincemeat out of it, all sort of crazy FUD talk, right? So it's like I'm really curious how you got into it.
Yeah, it's funny. So coincidentally, it was a YouTube video. All right. So it was a video on companies that were about to go public. This was over the summer in 2020. Of course, Palantir went public in September of 2020. So I
Yeah,
had learned about the company, and it sort of piqued my interest, the description of the company and what they were doing. Because I really believe in data and being able to leverage that. Especially, I've read a couple books on what I'm forgetting the name of the book. Oh, The Future is Faster Than You Think, I think is one of them. And that's really
okay,
like an ARK Invest style of like, we've got all of these converging technologies. And that the convergence means that the leverage is going to be so much higher for these companies using the data, right? So anyway, my interest was in the data, and I heard they were going public, but it wasn't until a few months later that they actually did. So what I did is I made a video right before I called it their IPO. That was before I actually knew it was their DPO. But anyway, I was following the company. I was like, we saw, I forget what other companies were going public around that time, but some of
yeah,
them
there was
were
a few.
two
Yeah,
times higher than their offering price or whatever. So I was like, oh, I might buy some shares as long as this thing doesn't open above 20 or 30, like, because I didn't know what
yeah,
to expect. But yeah, I just bought a little bit from what I could afford at the direct listing price, and was following it, made a follow-up video. I was like, this company is very interesting. I found their, what was it? Their shareholder pitch video. No,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
their like, road show or whatever, not even a road show. But anyway, the more I learned, the more I got interested in what they're doing on the commercial side. And that's sort of what's come after. And of course, keeping up with everything. But then ARK Invest got into it. And I was like, wow, I was before ARK Invest. Um, so then it would sort of clicked. It was like, maybe this could be something big. Not that ARK Invest is the indication of that, but I
Yeah.
personally still believe in ARK Invest. I think they do great work. I think their timing is off. I mean, I couldn't do it better with the timing, to be honest. Not shoot myself in the foot constantly by selling Tesla and buying Roku on the way down. But I don't know. I have nothing against them. I actually think they're going to do very well and surprise a lot of people in the long run. I think it's interesting what they did with Palantir, but that's off topic here.
Yeah.
What I saw them because I had been following their work on Tesla prior, and that sort of kicked it off. Focused more and more on Palantir,
Yeah.
and that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, for me, it was really funny actually. In 2008, or no, sorry, 2012, I went to a cousin's wedding in San Diego, and the guy, actually, it's funny because he now has like some really high position working for Aptera, pretty much right under like C-suite. So I've been trying to get him on a pod, and he's like, I don't want people to know I'm related to you, dude. So anyway, but long story short, yeah. So I remember talking to him, and I'm like, man, this is amazing. I want to move here, because like where I am, it's like 60% of the time it's cold as hell. So, California is like a paradise. So I'm like, I want to move here. What are the companies I could work for? And
Yeah.
that's when I was still in school, right? And he was like, yeah, there's a few companies, but what you really want is you want to look for like, really good data companies. Check out this one. And he sent me a few of them, and like the second or third one was Palantir. And I remember looking, and it was funny because they had like, at that time when I looked at it, they didn't have that high of a salary as other companies, but they had like, oh, we have this all this culture stuff. We have equity feel like, and it didn't explain too much about culture. They literally, I think, I can't remember if I screenshot this, but it was literally like, if you like engineering, you like to work here. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? So, and then that's when I first got into it. And I started looking into these companies more. And I was like, holy crap, this thing is going to be a banger when it comes out, right? So like, I can't wait for the IPO, and I guess they DPO'd. But yeah, since then, that's so I was literally waiting for it. And I applied. They applied to them around 2018. But it was like our skill set wasn't a match, and whatever, it is what it is. But yeah, so I've been tracking them since then, just casually, and then really intensely after like 2019. And then when I caught your first video, not first, but one of your first videos on that stuff, I'm like, yeah, someone's on it. But yeah, man, cool. I know that there's a lot of folks that got into the stock because of this next point. So I want to get your thoughts on just the leadership in general. Now, like for me, and this gets me into hot water with like the community a lot, but there's some stuff like, for example, a lot of people are just like blindfolded by the fact that it's Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, and fair, right? Peter Thiel's a fantastic investor, and if you're like, I'll invest in whatever he's invested in, maybe I'll make money, and that's fine. But
Yeah,
for
but
me, that's not.
some people are on the other side of that politically,
Yeah.
and they don't want to.
But that's crazy, right? It's like Alex Karp is like, completely on the other side compared to Peter Thiel, and
Yeah.
they're still managing to run a company. So like, it's, it is what it is. But yeah, so
Yeah.
like, what are your takes on, Palantir leadership, specifically whoever you want to mention outside, even Shyam, for example, that you've spoken to personally?
Yeah, so I think with Karp initially, he's very unique, and I feel like, well, given that he has no technical background, like putting that aside, you need a leader that's able to unite all of these, like this whole diverse employee base.
Yeah.
And like, given that not just, I mean, I guess, yeah, like software engineers is like, that's who Palantir is. It's an engineering culture.
Yeah.
And being able to tie everyone together with a mission and like, we're doing work that matters, and like, here's how we're going to achieve that. I feel like not everyone can do that on the organizational side. So dealing with like conflicting, like just conflict in general, I feel like I think it's much harder than you would realize for a company like Palantir, because what they're doing is so hard, and they're sort of pushing towards this future. They're getting pressure from all angles. Like they were getting pressured to go public like years ago by the banks themselves. Like they were anyway. I think Harp has done a great job on unifying this company and really making it what it is today. And I think that's not something you could say for a non-technical person, really, that you
Yeah.
would expect. But what I really like is the dynamic between Karp and just the operations, like Sham, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
is that Karp has the long-term future in mind. And that's the reason it says on the investor relations earnings releases is Alex Karp's 2025 target or whatever, like long term. It says long term
Yeah.
on it. Like he's the one that's saying, like, here's where we need to be from a business perspective. And these are the sort of milestones we want to achieve. And now that they've gone public, that stuff is very important. Not that it hasn't been there, but now it's like
Yeah.
publicly accessible. So I think he's doing a great job on the long term focus, which is what you need from a CEO. And I think not just my personal perspective is not all of it is what we can see. I think a lot of it's
Oh
behind the
man, I know.
scenes in terms of internal targets. Like if we could hear those internal targets, I think we'd be even more confident. Anyway, that's Carp. Now we got like Teal, as you mentioned. As far as I know, he's not involved really at all. Not involved in the day to day,
Yeah.
which is expected at this point, obviously, in the previously. But so
Well, Founders Fund does that, right? That's their kind of philosophy where they want to find good, find good, founders that are still in companies, and then just kind of let them do their thing and provide capital. So yeah,
yeah,
that's a fair point.
yeah. And I think didn't Teal, I think he picked Carp, right? Because they were
Yeah,
roommates, and yeah,
yeah,
I
they went
forgot
to
the name
school
of that.
together. Yeah,
Yeah. So totally supportive of that. It would be nice. I mean, I'm sure Teal is consulted on, so like if there is something that he needs to know about. But anyway, on Sham, I think he has also done a great job. I think he kind of got like a bad rap for like this past Q3 earnings call where it was like
right.
everyone was kind of fed up with the like sales pitch and was like, come on, put Carp on. But I think he's done a great job. Like the operations of this company is not easy. And I think whenever you get him in an interview setting, it is gold. Like this guy is so great at like explaining what is going on. Like both of the leaders of this company, Sham and Carp, are excellent when it comes to explaining what the company does. It's not a black box. It's just you need to hear more about it before you can understand what it's
Yeah,
doing.
that's fair. You just got to ask the right questions and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, I had the opportunity to speak to Sham. Such a nice guy. I didn't get to speak to him for very long, but when I did, that was in Q2 earnings report. That was over the summer. Amazing. He was super kind about it, and he was like, "Yeah, we'd like to give you this opportunity to ask us questions." Unfortunately, I wasn't like the person I was talking to before. I wasn't allowed to record it because like that's their, and I couldn't ask about like financial stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, big picture questions, but he answered everything, and it was super nice about it, and it's like appreciative of everyone that's doing this kind of thing for the community, because I mean, there's not much much else they can do but say thank you. So great experience
They
observing.
can give us free swag.
What did you say?
They can send us like free hats and stuff. Come on, Jackson.
Yeah.
You should have asked for it. You should have, man. Next time you get talk to him, be like, listen, Sham, send our boy Cyberfam some pajamas and like,
I
brand
think
it up.
they're sold out of all their merch. What's his name? It's Chad Palantard's all upset because they don't have it. They haven't replenished their merchandise. But anyway, I think Palantir's leadership is great. I don't see it changing anytime soon, and I think it is the right leadership for this kind of company.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, it's really important to not just be sensational about who's like leading the company and actually look through it. Like I've always, I told this to Chris the other day, and this again, like people are pissed off when I say this, but I feel like Alex Karp is more like and all these guys are in the comment section. Hey, Chris, but like all the what's it called? I feel like Elon is more like more like a floor general or something, right? Whereas Alex Karp would be like way in the back. He'd be like the actual general, kind of like doing the big picture things, and Elon would be the guy who's actually leading the troops and going forward.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people try to compare the two, but it's really hard to conflate them because you have to be able to understand like Elon. So like I don't think Alex Karp would do as well, for example, trying to lead something like Tesla, just because you need for when you deal with like software engineers, for example, the cycles are faster. Whereas Tesla now, they are dealing with a lot of great software engineers. I'm not saying they're not, but what's happening, I feel at least, is with Elon's case, he was trying to take like a Luddite industry, like something that has forever been the same thing over and over and over again, and then turn it into this agile software scopes type of deal. And you need to have somebody that's like, either you follow me or you die kind of attitude to do that. Whereas Karp is more like, hey, let me know what you think. Come into my barn, Let's do a little chat and let's see what happens, right? Which you really need for working with the people that definitely Palantir employs. So Yeah, man, good to get your thoughts on that. Okay, so the next one, I think we'll just cover this really quick, just for like the stock folks out there. But what are your earnings reactions now? For me, I'll just cut this like as plainly as I could. I was completely not disappointed at all. Now I understand that right after that ARC dipped and all this, a whole bunch of stuff happened. Right? When I mean dipped, I mean like got out of the stock, but realistically speaking, I actually thought it was a pretty good earnings. Like I felt like the only thing I look for, so for the guys in the chat and anybody else, the only thing I look for really is the commercial growth. From what I know, from what I understand, the government side of it, and trust me, I've done government contracts, it will not grow. Okay, if it grows, it'll be like very minimal, and it's all like word of mouth stuff, within the different departments and stuff like that. But the commercial side of it is really what needs to catch fire, and that's the only thing I'm looking for. Just like how in the early days of Tesla, the only thing you're looking for is something like deliveries or whatever the case is. Right now, you can look at margins and so on and so forth. But what are your takes on that, Jackson?
Yeah, just first on the ARK Invest, I'm not completely sold, meaning convinced that that this earnings was the reason they had exited their position. I'm pretty sure this was a decision they had made prior, and they were just using this as the Palantir tequila. They were using this as the reason for selling out. So I don't know. They talk about that the government was slowing down the business, and that's why they sold. I don't know. But anyway, my reaction, a little bit below what I was expecting on the growth side. So I was forecasting like as like a not like a base case, but like a more closer to a bull case. What I had expected would move the stock up was what I was forecasting for, which was like 448 million. And what did they end up doing? Like 431 or something, or not 431. I usually I know this stuff, but they were under it. Or 439 maybe. I don't know. They were a little bit under what I was saying was like this is what I would hope for. But that doesn't really matter. Like a few million here and there. It doesn't change. I guess it shifts the area under the curve a bit for the growth, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything. But what came up on the call was, and showed up in the earnings report, is like commercial is now moving much faster than government. Now, before it was like, this is just a government business. There's no commercial. And now it's, where's the government business? What happened to that? So what I heard from Karp on the call, and he was, let me just say, like, that was amazing to have him on the call. I think Sham's done great before, but to have Karp there, he was literally saying, like, what are your concerns about the business? Let me address them. So excellent. So he was forthright. I know you said you don't really focus on or care much about the government side, but in terms of picking up the slack there, what I heard from Karp is this is more of like a temporary thing. It's like more seasonal, but also Europe was slowing down. Like that's going to pick back up. Hopefully, like this is not a slowdown that should be prolonged. So anyway, the barn, everyone loves the barn.
We should throw a raid in there.
Chris Patel was just telling me the headquarters should be relocated to the barn. But maybe. Anyway, my reaction to the earnings, good, not great, meaning great, like what I would hope for, best case. Good, not great. That's been me with the last few. Commercial growth has been excellent, especially U.S. commercial growth. Now it's a matter of not only keeping that up, but extending that to other segments.
Hook it up, Jackson. No, but no, I know what you mean. And by Jot from Bill's Life was talking about it too. When I mean government won't grow, I'm talking about like relative to commercial. There's a lot more things to be had in the commercial side of it, the government side of it. Like because the processes themselves are more meandering than something like on the commercial side. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of different things to do, especially with Europe, things like GDPR and a lot of different stuff for software too. So that's what I mean. It's not going to be as scalable, or at least as fast as something like commercial. So yeah, no, fair enough. That's a good point, Jackson. So okay, so this is another quick one I wanted to just get off, just because we're in the middle of like a global sort of like, I guess, wartime issue, whatever. Palantir conflict. Now, in this thing, I actually think that there's a lot of like things like, for example, Meta Constellation sits there and literally just tracks people. It's like eyes in the sky type of deal. But there's, apart from Meta Constellation, there's a lot of things that Palantir themselves. I mean, Alex Karp himself seemed like a little bit reluctant, or a little bit sort of standoffish when it came to global conflict. They're almost like preparing for something to happen for a while now. So it's almost like an ominous sort of sign that they either knew something, or I mean, I'm not saying they knew something, but they either had a feeling that something was about to sort of like, shit was about to hit the fan or whatever the case is. But it's really crazy to think that, because these guys really sit there and sift through tons of data and massive data sets to come through some kind of conclusions or whatever. So what do you think, like, what do you think the overall impact, especially with the current conflict that's happening? I feel like more companies would be, or more countries, especially, actually, this could be a government growth side thing, right? Where they could actually look towards Palantir to provide some value there in a surveillance almost type of deal.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is tailwinds for the government side uh, solely almost. I don't know if this is going to lead to many commercial, sort of what we're dealing with right now with and observing, unfortunately, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I don't think that's going to lead to much commercial activity. Whereas I think it is going to spur, at the very least, some conversations from really everyone, NATO and even maybe past that, on like, we need to be a little more uh, what's the word for it, preemptive or whatever, on this sort of thing. Like, this software has more meaning than maybe we thought previously, something like that. And I know Palantir, of course, has got their sales team ready to go on that sort of stuff. But it's this sort of thing that really exemplifies the power and the importance of what Palantir's been doing. Like, of course, defense, and that's, I mean, Gotham, even, that's what Palantir's been working on for the longest time. So this is no surprise to them. This sort of conflict being very, like, something you need to prepare for, and this is like what you want to have prepared. You don't want to have to deal with this in the moment. You want to be ready for it, and stuff like that. So in terms of Palantir knowing this was coming, a lot of people bring this sort of thing up,
Yeah,
like in other ways too, like buying the gold in August of last year. Yeah, I'd say no to that, because they say, like, we don't process the data. We don't actually, it's like they can't read it, right? They can't read
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
data. So anyway, I don't think, like, they have connections to the degree that they can
Infer.
potentially have
Yeah,
insight into this. Like, there's
yeah.
no doubt about that. But I don't think they have, like, information that benefits their buying of
Hold me
$51
back, man.
million dollars of gold. Like,
No, no, I know.
51
Yeah,
billion. They
it's
just
pretty crazy to
incinerated
think that.
160 million in SPACs.
Yeah,
So that'll come back. But yeah,
yeah,
I think it's more of like Carp again. This guy is so smart. And like, I love his background because he can say, this is the future we're headed towards. This is where we're currently going. This is like what's going to happen
yeah,
is
yeah.
conflict. And we can prepare for that. We can build for that. That's what he means by building 10 years ahead. He's like, this is bound to happen. We're just going to build
Yeah.
for it. I don't think there's much more to say on the whole conflict just yet. I think it's going to be more interesting what comes out of it. And
I
hopefully
think
we
so.
get to this peaceful resolution very shortly. But I'm talking about, contracts and the like, and see how things develop. But we saw Germany, I forget exactly what it was, but it was $100 billion or 100 billion. I think it was dollars. Was
Oh, the upspend. Yeah.
yeah, spending. Yeah. So we'll see where that goes.
No, for sure. And just a closing point on that, I think obviously there's a huge humanitarian crisis and stuff like that happening too. We're not just looking at it from a Palantir angle, but it's important to know that. I'd also argue that, by the way, this whole conflict could also help the commercial side of it, just because it is disrupting some supply chains as well. And that's kind of a weird segue into not a weird, but a decent segue, I guess, into this next point, which is Palantir supply chain. All right, man. Let me get your thoughts on this whole Merck Hyundai. I think these are the ones that have been the big fish that are, like, we know about the IBM one. We know about Skywise, which has been fantastic this whole time,
Yeah.
increasing like operational stuff for Airbus this whole time. They're even leveraging out to other people to use it.
Yeah.
What do you think of Merck? What do you think the medium to long term effects of that would be? Because I mean, I know that there's like just from your own research and stuff, but supply chain is a long, like, enduring sort of space, right? I feel like Palantir getting to this space, especially with Hyundai actually, and with Merck, these two specifically, I think it's going to increase their efficiency so much to a point where other competitors will pretty much have to take the solution. And I think Merck, in specifically in their case, they're trying to actually onboard things like competitors and people down the chain and up the chain as well. So it's almost going to become like an entire ecosystem. So what are your takes on that from the medium to long term? Not for the stock. I'm talking about like the impacts.
Impacts on, you're saying, just supply chains in general?
Yeah,
Like,
because we're going through that problem right now. We're going through a massive supply chain
yeah,
crisis and all
yeah.
this. So like, how do you think it'll potentially impact that?
Okay, I actually didn't. There's so much news that I can't get to all of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't get to the Merc. I don't think. Like, I heard about it, didn't make a video on it. I can talk about the Hyundai Heavy Industries. So that's much more of a, and it's interesting because there are like a few different levels to what Palantir does. They'll either do like a contract.
Right.
I guess they still call those partnerships, maybe. I guess
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
because they are.
they call them partners. So yeah, I figured.
And then some of them are like strategic partners where they're not getting paid. They're just, this is like what the Hyundai one is. They're getting paid a little, but with Hyundai, they're developing a platform, which is very interesting. And then there's the SPACs where it's like, we're investing, we're getting equity for this, for the partnership. So I guess there are like 3 different ways of a partnership happening. But the Hyundai Heavy Industries. So Palantir is actually getting like a small, like 25 million or something from this over however long. But I like what they're doing because they're saying, hey, you need a platform for this. Like, what you're doing with your work is such that we can develop a product. I don't know if they're going to call it like a module or whatever, what the term for it is, but they're going to develop that. And then they're going to be able to use that for other players and for other companies as well. So they're going to do this specialized work specifically with Hyundai Heavy Industries to be able to repurpose it in the future. I'm not sure. That is for supply chain, right? It's been a while since I looked at this. I believe it is.
Yeah.
But in terms of the impact, I think, well, Dave Lee asked me this question is like, can Palantir save these companies that are potentially getting disrupted? And I think it's a very interesting question. Now, like, I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know. Like, I can't forecast that.
So
but
here's what I'm thinking, right? Like I took a look at some of the Merck stuff, and of course we can only take a look at what we know. And the idea is that generally supply chain, actually Jot from the Bliss Life is in the chat. He's worked in supply chain in the past, but generally speaking, like, okay, supply chain, the main number one problem with the supply chain was it was basically everything was just in time, which essentially means if you need something, right, you get it at the time that you would potentially need it, or just a little bit of a delay where you're able to adjust. But the reason why everything worked is because everybody was doing it. That's pretty much how it worked. And generally with supply chain, you actually have a lot of big data, but the problem is it just comes through as kind of like a meandering process, right? The problem ends up being, okay, if one kink happens down the chain or up the chain, it affects the entire supply chain, unfortunately, because again, everything was just in time. So by the time, it's almost like a polling system. Like, you don't understand until you actually go and ask the question. So like if a supplier has an issue somewhere, then the person down, it's like a broken telephone. They'll call you and they're like, oh yeah, okay, let me check with my supplier. And okay, let me check with my supplier. And eventually they're like, oh no, we're screwed. And then it goes back up the chain, right? So in a way, that was a problem with what they're doing. I think with Merck, at least from what I understood, was that they're building sort of like an ecosystem, just like you're talking about with Hyundai, where they can actually onboard people, even competitors of Merck. But the idea is that by doing that, like, the buying power of whoever is actually making these purchases can go to different suppliers at different times, and based on this like platform, it can give them like a different pricing model or something like that based on that current event in the supply chain, right? So it's not always part per part. It's obviously like larger transactions than that, but the idea is that it's almost like an ecosystem for that entire niche, which is, if that's what I understand it to be, it's gonna drastically change it, because it'll change that entire like polling system like model to something that's more dynamic, right? You can almost like you can almost plan ahead and make these orders like ahead of time and stuff like that if you really wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen with supply chains just as a whole from the pandemic on, like, things have not been fixed, like, in the slightest. So really from that perspective, I think what Palantir is doing there is like they have a lot left to build, but that work is so, so important because it applies to literally everyone from as far as I can tell, right?
Did you end up ordering like a computer or something through the pandemic or in the past year?
Yeah.
Did it take you a long time to come?
So I ordered this Apple computer MacBook Pro when it got announced. So I think I was early enough
Yeah.
that they had the inventory already produced.
Oh, okay, okay.
It was just a matter of shipping it out. But yeah, I mean, other stuff, like it's crazy.
Yeah, dude, I got a new job during the past year. I remember like they're like, "Oh, what kind of computer do you want?" I'm like, "Well, can you give me a Mac? Anything
Yeah.
that's fine. M1 is probably best, but whatever you have, right?" Like, yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. We'll just have to order from Apple. And I was like, "Oh, okay, right." And this was, I think, in right after the summer, so right before fall kicked off, and then 2 weeks passed, 3 weeks passed, and they're like, "Okay, we're gonna have to have you use your computer because we can't just pay you for no reason." So in a way, it was almost like I got like almost 3 weeks of pay from doing nothing. But hey, whatever. But it took it. So I got the job in like August, and then the computer came by November. So it was pretty ridiculous, and I think I had an issue with my wife's monitor as well. So it's like random stuff is just being disrupted here and there. So I guess you can't just turn this thing off like an on and off tap, right? It takes some time to recuperate from the pandemic and all this other stuff that happened. Cool, man. Okay, so
Definitely.
let's get into something that's a little more fun that actually I guess in a sort of like abstracted way all of us are kind of part of, which is the whole like growth of Palantir and their YouTube channel,
Sure.
content marketing. And I actually want to touch on Arnie's question from Twitter too. But okay, I know that in the past year, like before I'm sure everyone knows this, but you were basically Palantir's PR for like a good like year and a half, right? And then they started really adding more and more content on their YouTube channel. Now it was there from before. They have stuff from like I think 3, 4, or 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
But in the more recent terms, it's almost like they add every interview. They add like that's why there's so many barn sessions from Mount Carp, right? Ever since they moved to like Denver, there's so much content on YouTube, which I actually appreciate because everybody actually thought it was such a black box of a company that like we needed to see more stuff, right? We need to see more like
Yep.
it's almost like you get a pulse as to what the company is doing. So like, what's your take on that stuff, and how do you like the content and how you think it's impacting the community?
Well, it's interesting. So I don't have data from like my observations from before they went public, but I know they have videos there from like a while ago. There's Palantir 101, like 3-minute video, but of course not consistent uploads. And so, yeah, hopium, yeah, that's what a lot of people say. But yeah, so the content most recently has changed. So I know you wanted to talk about the change over time. So when they first went public, they didn't really know what marketing was going to work. So, like Carp was on CNBC. They did
Right.
they did like the shareholder video that was like an hour long, hour and a half. Like they did this long form stuff that was good, but it wasn't a consistent frequency. Like it was like less frequent uploads. So that wasn't very helpful. We didn't get like check-ins on what's going on with the business, like do we have a new contract, partnership, stuff like that. But as they started getting partnerships throughout the year, it
Yeah.
would, yeah, Palantir channel. Yeah, I know a lot of businesses, like I know Apple turns off the comments. Like I'm sure a lot of them, it's like not worth moderating something like that. It's
Yeah.
just like they just shut off the comments, which is fine,
You already
I
know
guess.
some of the comments that are going to be on that thing.
Yeah, yeah. But they started doing like short form or like medium form, like we got a partnership. Here's what this company does. Here's how we're helping them, stuff like that.
Right. Right.
And then they were doing the demo days, which they've now uploaded to YouTube, but they were streaming those. There was the demo day, which was just all three platforms. And then they did a double click, life
Right.
sciences and industrials. That was just on Foundry. They said they're doing more of those and haven't yet. Now I get that it's probably one of the less important things to be doing, but I would like an update on that
Yeah.
because Tom said like it's a lot of work, but they do like doing those, and it is helpful on inbound, which is good. But anyway, I think they've gotten down to a sweet spot with experimenting. Now, there's no way you can find this out if you don't experiment and if you don't actually put the content out. But what I've liked most from them is short to medium form, very like you don't need knowledge on what the company does to understand it. Like when they make a partnership, if you want to learn more as an investor, I think Palantir should give you like an introduction. And the other thing is like the use case. Like everyone wants to know the use cases. That makes it so much easier to understand what Palantir is doing, specifically how they're helping a company, how this can extend to other companies, a bunch of stuff like that. So what I've really liked in terms of their content more recently, I think they've really dialed it down to a place where it's really helpful for investors and for people that want to learn more about Palantir, which could be employees. So I think they've gotten it to a place where they explain the use cases well, very well. And if you want more, you can go to their demo days or whatever it may be.
Right,
But
right.
very frequent. And the other thing is Alex Karp. So we know that Sham was doing the conference calls since the beginning of the public, whatever it may be, whatever their first conference calls up until this past one. Sham was doing all of them. Now, that was great. And most people were fine with that. I think it just came down to Alex Karp not necessarily wanting to take on that responsibility of publicly presenting to investors, which when you think about it, that's just more of a formality. Like we know he's
Yeah,
working.
exactly.
He's the chief executive. Like he's running the business. It's a formality to actually be the one in front of investors, like to have memorized your script and to take their questions. Like, of course, the institutional investors want to be able to talk to Karp right there, and they have that access. And also for the retail investors, it is super helpful to have the leader right there. So I think they finally made that adjustment. I don't know if it's gonna be every quarter. They didn't say if it's going to be future quarters or it's an annual thing or something like that. But anyway, I think they got the message loud and clear that we needed more from Alex Karp. And that's why you've seen all of these interviews that he's been doing. He's been spending a lot of time to get the message out about Palantir, to support investors in terms of explaining the company, the vision, what they're doing. We've seen that he's been going to all sorts of conferences. Just go back and look. Like this guy's been putting in the work, like seriously. And yeah, his appearance has been strong. It's been very public over the last like 4 or 5 months or so. It's been great. I think that they've really evolved in terms of content and marketing. What they're not supposed to do really is to sell the stock. That's not what you're supposed. That's just a waste of time because you get people in for the wrong reasons. They're just going to leave. So they're not trying to sell the stock. Okay, unlike maybe other companies that are like their stock is their product, as I've heard. So I think they've done a great job. It's really about the company. It's about educating on the company, and the executive can most often do that the best. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I think and to address the whole like Sham and conference call thing, I think Alex could, if he can carry this stuff for the next few years, I don't think there's any issue with Sham coming and doing the same approach he did. I do understand why he did that though, because I've seen that in meetings where sales folks come and it's the same pitch. You hear that pitch all the time. It is very salesy, but that's how some people sort of identify with the software they potentially want to buy. Right. So
Sure.
I understand they were trying to do a sales pitch. I get that.
Yeah, the only thing that's a bit, just if I could add one thing, it's a bit
Yeah.
like disingenuous, kind of like when you're giving your report. Like you're giving your report, you missed on some metric, and now you're like sales, sales, sales. Like I think that's kind of why I think investors got a little upset. Is like if you deliver stellar numbers, I guess you could do that. But we want to hear why the numbers are the way that they are, not something else. But that's just another thing.
Yeah, no, fair point. Yeah, I think, and I just want to give a quick nod to like a lot of the I know like there's a lot of new people in the whole Palantir community. Some of them are actually in our comments and stuff like that. So I think the community is largely sort of like rallied around the stock, and that could be one of the reasons. That there's a lot of retail in the stock, right? That could be one of the reasons it goes up and down. But I think the community itself is presenting a lot of good use cases as to how they sort of like operate and things like that, and giving their perspectives on it. Some real professionals are actually on the stuff, right? So like Chris and Arnie and all these folks, and you yourself as well. I mean, you're the OG man. I can't take enough away. But yeah, so I think it's definitely one of those things that it's going to help for sure. Like you're talking about, it's almost like it's bridging the gap between the super technical to the point where people actually are able to identify and understand with it on a common level. Because that's the thing. A lot of folks that, especially in some of my videos in the comment section, people don't fully understand it at all. Like I just had a conversation with somebody, like 2 days ago, where he's like, "Oh, this is like Google DeepMind." I'm like, "No, it's a totally different area of the stack, right? You have to take a look at it." And after he looked at it, he's like, "You know what? I think I might put some money into this and that kind of stuff, right?" So While it's more of it's a definitely a due diligence company, right? So it's one of those things. I mean, not that any other company isn't. It's just that this one you need that extra little bit of attention. So I think I can definitely appreciate all of our content creators, especially as well as the Palantir channel to really bolster this stuff. All right, I think we've sort of beaten the dead horse a little bit. I know, in the interest of time, I want to move on to something that's a little bit more fun. Tesla. All right, so I know that I hold Tesla. You said that you don't hold Tesla right now, right?
No, I do.
You do. Okay, so what are your takes on that? Now, I actually think in the long run, right? I think they're actually kind of weirdly intersecting, just like other companies, like all the big tech companies. They're all doing some sort of AI work and stuff like that. Tesla's going for artificial general intelligence, AGI, basically. Palantir is going for more of like I feel like a more narrow approach, more sort of like functional based, like something that's more going to actually solve an actual problem rather than being sort of a broad perspective. These are all different kinds of AI and stuff like that, right? Actually, so Darntons is in the comment, and I did an interview with him, and in that interview, it's not out yet, but I mentioned this, right? And if you can give your overall take on this, that'd be good too. But I mentioned that people always talk about this, where like, oh, because there's a lot of fear around automation and artificial intelligence, right? And see, I'm coming from like my entire family is basically blue collar for the most part, right? My dad actually used to be a truck driver for a long, long time, and that was the one use case they were like, oh, it's not like truck drivers. There's always new jobs that are going to come out. So artificial intelligence is only going to create new jobs. But the problem is the people that are losing those jobs that it displaces, they're not always the ones that are going to get the jobs that are being created. So it's not like my dad can just learn how to, look up a neural net and start like, developing machine learning code, right? So in a way, we have to be cognizant of how this stuff is moving forward. So, there's that worry, but then there's also the fact that all these companies are almost converging into this AI space, which is actually one of the reasons ARK was talking about Palantir and Tesla and all these other companies, right? And by the way, the Palantir thing I'm talking about, for those of you guys don't know, I'm talking about edge AI, where it runs on like really obscure remote devices and stuff like that. But just your thoughts on that, Jackson.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of Tesla, I think what you just laid out was like the ultra long term, is like the convergence of these two. But on Tesla, I think it's very interesting. We're about to get the third master plan from Elon Musk, which will be very exciting. He actually just said on Twitter that it's actually going to mention his other companies as well, which I think that's going to be the first time that has been brought up, in terms of like, we know that maybe engineers move back and forth between SpaceX and Tesla, and boring companies like using Teslas, and so is SpaceX, stuff like that. But in terms of where they're headed, it's been made obvious by him as the visionary, right? Is that they're solving. So they're like, there's this sustainable part. They're like, how can we accelerate our sustainable effort? And that's by multiplying the ability to use a car. So they do that, and then they build these cars, and then they multiply their use by self-driving, because the usage of the car goes up. So that accelerates their mission. Now, when they were developing the self-driving, they discovered that if they really want to do it right and not have it geofenced or mapped or any of that, they can't rely on radar, which they had in the cars that they stopped using. They stopped producing it, and they never had LiDAR. Now, people are like, oh, Elon doesn't know how LiDAR works. Yeah, he does. He uses that for SpaceX, to land his rock or whatever, dock with the whatever it is, space station, stuff like that. But so they're just doing a camera approach. Now, everyone knows this. But my take is, and it's not a brilliant take or anything, it's what they said themselves, is the reason it's taken so long, the reason that Elon has been so late on the timing, is this is a much harder problem than he had initially thought it was. And the reason for that is because they're doing so much more than the self-driving itself. Now they're solving for vision, which can be applied, which I guess you can say is a real world application of AI. So they went from the cars to the self-driving, but they pretty much have leapfrogged the self-driving to going to the AI itself. Now, I'm a little skeptical in terms of, like, they say they're solving for vision. I don't know, like, as a non-technical person, I'm not sure how easy that is going to be able to be applied to something else. Like, I get the bot. I get that the bot can move around and see things and do that, but I'm not sure how that ultimately leads to AGI. I'm not sure. I
So
get that
yeah,
the raw like power of what they're doing. I don't think anyone else can really do that at this stage. So I
right.
understand. I don't know, but that's the thing. I'm not investing for AGI with Tesla. I think that's a nice call option. It's
Yeah.
going to take a
Mm,
while. It's possible. Like I trust people that are smarter than me on this, on the whole AGI. And I think with Tesla, they've done a great job on laying out the different, like it's almost like a ladder. It's like we did this. This is what we're shooting for next.
right.
This is what we're shooting for next. I made this graphic for Dave Lee, which was the EVs, then the energy, or no, then the AVs, the energy, whatever, and the bot. Like it just keeps going. Like they know what they're like. Elon knows what he's doing in terms of attacking these big issues,
Right.
and making money on it and building the market cap to be able to reward the employees, and so he can accumulate more to send people to Mars. So yeah, I'm big on Tesla. And was there a sorry? I think I missed your part on tying
No,
that back to Palantir.
no, you're good. No, I'm just saying like all these companies are focusing on things like artificial or in AI or some form of machine learning in general.
Yeah,
On your point about how it might not be transferable, I think you're right. Like you're absolutely on point. But I think what's happening is what people don't realize is there's a dichotomy, right? So like the application of it could be something like Tesla bot and could be self-driving. But what
yeah,
people actually are not understanding, I don't know, I'm sure some people are, but generally the understanding that people aren't getting is that there's a layer, like for example Dojo, right, and the whole neural net that they're doing, they're actually they're changing the way that they're actually writing their neural nets and using that, so it can actually be applied for both the robot and for self-driving. They're not very identical. Some code might be shareable, but not on the functional part, more on like how it's trained, for example. So like if Dojo can actually help train this stuff, then it can actually train other things, and that's one of the things that they were talking about, how they could potentially make it as a service or whatever the case is, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I think that's actually it's almost like the whole blockchain versus the Bitcoin strategy, right? Like Bitcoin and Ether, they all run on some form of blockchain, and people tend to look at like the coin itself rather than the tech itself that runs this kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
that I think that's where it'll become more clear. I think once they start to solve a few, large
Mhm.
bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I would like
Cool.
to say a few more things. I can
Yeah.
go a little longer, but on Tesla, yeah. So like I'm mainly in it for the product side, and I've experienced FSD. I posted like one video on it, the FSD beta. So I've been in 10.3 up through 10.11. And so like I've seen it, like I've been in it, like we've done
No
many
way.
different use cases and stuff. It's good, not great, like
Okay.
as you'd expect. Like you literally have to be paying attention. You don't know when it's gonna, like there's a mail truck on the side of the road, it's gonna go straight into it, like
Yeah.
stuff
I
like
bet
that.
you it's better than a lot of other ones though, because it's
Yeah.
like,
Oh, I know.
yeah,
It's the best there is. And it's improving too. It's
yeah.
crazy. But like another example is like it's going to make a turn, but it wants to take an angle to that turn.
Mm,
The problem is there are cars that are going on the other side that are trying to get around it, like goes past the white line.
yeah.
So that like when the car goes to make the turn, these other cars are going to like hit the side of it because no one's expecting you to take a
Okay.
wide
Okay.
angle into the turn, stuff like that. But yeah, so like I completely understand. Like it's obvious to me how self-driving is going to, like, what that's going to do to the stock and stuff like that. There was one other thing I was saying or thinking about. Oh, the bot. So I understand. Like I kind of get it how it's going to transfer to the bot, and I understand. Like the other thing is no one's going to price into the stock self-driving until they absolutely have to in terms of the analysts, because no one's going to say like Tesla's worth 5,000 next year because we think self-driving is coming next year. Like no one's going to do that. There's no reason to take that risk as an institutional analyst.
Right.
Like there's
Right.
no reason to do that. So you wait for it to be proved. So Tesla has to prove it, and they've been so late on it. So like there's no reason to expect that it's going to happen very soon. Now I think the retail understanding is that it's close. It's very close, but it's not. It's not 1 year out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Out. My expectation is 1 year out. It's wide release, meaning you don't have to go through the dumb safety score where you have to like drive 10 miles an hour and not hit the brakes. But I think what really piqued my interest from Tesla point of view is this last earnings call, where he was like, all right, we're going to do the product update. It was so hyped. And then he was like, the product update, we're doing the bot this year. That was the update. So everyone was
Which
upset.
means 5 years from now, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. So like they're going to build the bots now. They're hiring a lot of people for that. They've
Right.
already got the best talent, right, for that, and they're going to be able to apply what they're doing with self-driving to the bot. So what I think no one's expecting is really Elon is so confident about the self-driving, and if he's right, not only is that going to be huge, but they're going to have the bots ready to go already. Like
Yeah.
it's going to happen so much faster than everyone's thinking. Like it's not short term, but it's like
Medium, right?
the
At least.
S curve. I think going to be it's going to start towards the medium term, and
Yeah.
once that happens, I mean, who knows what the stock's going to do? But
I
I
know,
think
man.
it's such a fascinating company in terms of inventing like whole new like industries almost, or just like
Yeah, it's
put
true.
or moving the whole industry, right? So I think Tesla's fascinating. But all right, one more thing on that is like I don't think it's necessarily fun to say I only own one stock, right? That means like either it doesn't necessarily mean you got lucky, but it also doesn't mean you're a great investor.
Right.
Like I think owning more than one stock, it's just
Yeah.
fun. It's fun to follow these companies. It really, if you're just on one stock, I don't care what stock it is, you're really narrow. You're not going to be able to apply what you're like going through to anything else. So I don't like obviously it's not recommended. Like you can probably do great with that in mentality, but you have to be right. You have to be right. And I think it's more fun to follow the company. You'll learn more. And yeah, there'll be ups and downs for both. Like I think that's what I'm going for.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. Cool, man. So I think we'll close it off. But right before we close off, I want to do one question. So Arnie had a good question from Twitter, and I'll touch on this a little bit since it's a little more familiar. But we did address the whole marketing effort thing, Arnie. But like the one thing was he was like, what kind of consumption based model could introduce or could be introduced, or you just pricing changes or the existing one, right? So the existing one I think is a license based model, but the
Yeah.
consumption based models for those of you guys who are interested, and this I'm talking about Palantir, okay, not Tesla, but the consumption based model is that you basically pay as you go, you pay per use or whatever. It's almost like an AWS model. You know, if you want an EC2 server, you use that server and you only pay for when you use it or whatever the case is, right? A lot of
Mhm.
times there's instances where when you use it, it spins up and then it spins back down, things like lambdas and stuff like that. So I think so CodeStrap actually did this video, which I still have to review, where he went over some things, actually massive changes, Jackson. So you should probably look at that as well, if
Okay.
unless you haven't already. But
Yeah.
really big changes, and I actually thought that they weren't going to get to this point, but they were actually able to provision infrastructure. So I need to go and research into that. But the idea of this model could actually work. I'm not sure if they're going to do it, but I feel like they would eventually, because Alex Karp did talk about the fact that they're going to modularize their, things like Foundry, for instance, which
Mhm.
means, there's Foundry is a massive platform. It's a product, but it's literally a platform, right? Um,
Yep.
so within that, they might have different sort of like components that somebody could even use as a catalog model. So for instance, like an analyst can go in and say, oh, I like this one thing that performed this function. So they're going to bring that function in and it would be available as a platform, but Alex Karp would essentially chalk that out. And during a sales pitch or something, they could basically say, okay, right now, all you need is the machine learning models right now, or machine learning part of the Foundry software. But eventually you can add on the analytics side of it. Eventually you can add on the project management side of it, or the Git and the pipeline side of it and all this other stuff. So it's
Yeah.
possible that they will go to the model. It relates better to selling compute and selling cloud infrastructure,
Yeah.
but the idea of pay as you go, uh, what do you think about that, Jackson? Like when he said that he's going to chalk it up and split it up and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because they're developing what they're working on just as a company is, as he says, like these thick products. Not everyone wants the
Yeah.
thick product. Like, and what they're going for is like a future where you need the thick product. So that's what they're building for. So I get it in terms of this is what we're building, but he also understands, and he said this, that a lot today of what companies want is these thin products. So I think in terms of that, they're ready for both. They're ready to service either option. So I like the idea of the consumption based model. I'm getting that right. I think that could work more so for smaller companies, maybe. Like, what would you say? Is it for bigger companies or smaller companies? I'm thinking it's for smaller companies, right?
It can apply anywhere, to be honest. The
Okay.
problem is more so like, what if you don't have much to provision, for instance, like AWS has like 200 services, right? So if you're provisioning, any small subset of that, they can comfortably charge like a smaller amount. That's how they get in a lot, right? They can
Yeah.
comfortably price competitively and still make good money because they have so many services,
Yeah.
or
To
they have so
grow.
many dependencies. Exactly.
Okay.
Whereas Palantir right now, I don't know. I have to review CodeStrap's video, but I feel like it'll be more catered towards specific needs within the pipeline itself or something, like for the data side.
Mhm.
In that case, I still think it would be consumption based could work. It's just the price would be a little higher than you're traditionally used to. So if you're going from like a cloud, if you're looking at a cloud and then going to this,
Yeah.
they're not going to match one to one, I don't think. But that would be my take on that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
we'll see, right?
yeah, exactly. I think they can explore these different pricing options and opportunities. I think they
Yeah,
will as they continue to go from the high end down to just a medium provider to low end. Like I think they're going
yeah,
to have these different options. A license isn't going to work for everyone. And as you're saying, like I think that other thing, the consumption based model, I think that works in terms of scaling. I think that
yeah.
might work even better than a license. Like I'm sure, like if you expand farther, your license is going to increase or whatever. But I think, yeah, whatever. I'm sure they're thinking about this sort of stuff, but whatever works, I think that would be interesting to hear more on.
No, for sure. And our needs for it could be both. It depends on how they're selling it, by the way. So he's asking this question here. All right, guys, I think that's good. So closing thoughts, I think, guys, like there's a reason why I don't really talk too much about the stock price and stuff like that. I really am really bullish on the company. If you just track the stuff, like forget anything that we say, forget like me, forget don't forget Jackson, he's cool, but like the rest of us, right? Like go onto their YouTube channel, actually see the stuff that they're doing. There's lots of stuff in the community that where the news is spread and things like that. They're making a lot of moves, and your decision is really based on whether this move is actually like important for the long term goal of the business or not. And if you actually see the stuff that Alex Karp and leadership generally talk about, it is very important. And if we believe the things that they say they're going to do, I mean the price right now is going to look like a freaking rounding error.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying. But I'm still bullish, like obviously super bullish on the company. I do understand that this is uncertain times that we're living in, so people have to do what they do. Of course, none of this is like financial advice, but we just want to provide as part of the Palantir YouTube community. We want to provide like a good insight as to what we think and our perspectives on it, and be as objective as possible. But with that being said, man, Jackson, dude, like really awesome to have you on the show, man. Really thanks for coming on board. But I want to get your closing thoughts before we go.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me. No, I think, yeah, I mean, Karp says 20 times larger is what he's saying. And the interesting thing, I'm going to end up making a video on this, is he says that, and he also gets that past legal or whatever that he's always complaining about. I made a video a while back on Karp roasting his lawyers for 2 minutes straight. And it's like these many clips of him complaining that he can't say anything. I think that part of that is just kind of a joke, saying like, there's things that I would like to say to the investors, but I can't for like compliance reasons or anything like that. Anyway, he said like the first thing he said in one of these interviews was like, there's no reason why this company can't be 20 times larger. So like for him to get that out like right away and like say it like with confidence, like that is believable too. It's like you look at the growth, like what is the growth in the next 10 years that would lead to 20 times larger? Let's take a look. But anyway, my question really is, how are they going to get there? And I mean, their current growth rate can do it, because if you look, it's 35% for the next 10 years, doubles, or sorry, 20 X's, not doubles, 20 X's the current revenue. So it's 35%. But I'm really looking for an inflection point in Palantir where they're not just going at this 35, 30, 40. I think I'm looking for something much more. I don't think it's coming soon, but it's really going to come again from the commercial side. I think government, I actually sort of marginally disagree with your take on the government not growing. And I understand what you're saying, but I think it can grow not like vertically, but I think it can go like horizontally or whatever.
Like linear, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it can do more of that. I think commercial is going to far and away surpass that, but commercial needs to get to a point where it's accelerating its growth. I think it's doing it right now, but it's a low base, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking for an accelerating on a high base. I think that's all right. Anyway, that's what I'm saying is like what would really move the stock.
Yeah, fair enough.
The growth increasing. But so I'm looking towards that, and what I'm looking for is like support. They're planting the seeds with all these partnerships.
Yeah.
They're like putting the work in, getting the sales force, all the stuff we've talked about is like, that is what, in my opinion, is going to make that happen. So it's more of monitoring that, checking in quarterly, looking at the news, what's going on, what moves are they making, stuff like that, right? So so that's where I stand on Palantir. In terms of the stock, I know you said you don't look at the stock, which I think is fair, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been really tough for the stock.
Yeah, it's a little early. That's why. Yeah, I know. It's like with 2 years past, or not even 2 years after DPO, right? It's hard to,
year and a half, basically. Yep.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, for all of you guys who joined, I really appreciate all you guys coming on board and passing out your content and stuff. If you guys really, like the stuff we do, then feel free to go check out Jackson. I mean, the guy needs no introduction, but feel free to go show him some love with all his new content. He is still, to me, Palantir's PR. But yeah, man, I think the community is really growing great, man, and I think a lot of way you've been inspiring us to push our work and make us do better work. So again, appreciate you coming on board. For the rest of you guys, I will, I guess, catch you guys in the next one. Until then, peace.
Thank you, Shabari. This was great.